Having said that, this plan, this decision, this declaration does reflect a change in Europe, a sort of late realization about China. For years, Europe was oblivious to this threat. They talked about competing with China, they talked about engaging with China, but they never talked about conflict. Could that sentiment be changing now? Let's hit the rewind button. The date is December 2020. China and the European Union concluded a very important deal, a comprehensive agreement on investment. The EU was upbeat about it. They called it China's biggest ever agreement with another country. The biggest ever. This deal was supposed to chart the future of China-Europe ties, a partnership based purely on money. 2 years later, what's the status? Zero progress. In fact, things have become worse. The European Parliament is yet to ratify this investment deal, plus China is picking fights with multiple EU states, with Lithuania on Taiwan, with France and Germany over the South China Sea, and now over the Ukraine war. So where exactly did things go wrong? We'll come to that in a bit, but first let me tell you what is at stake. What was China hoping for from Europe? Broadly speaking, two things. Number one, a consistent and lucrative market. China is Europe's biggest trading partner, even bigger than the United States. Their total bilateral trade is worth around $700 billion. China wanted to keep that market open. Number two, a counterweight to US hegemony. For a long time, Europe was talking about strategic autonomy, possibly decoupling from Washington. If that happens, China stands to benefit. It could deny the US crucial influence in Europe. And this is classic Chinese strategy, making your enemies fight amongst each other. Think back to the 1960s and the 1970s. The Soviet Union was threatening China along its northern border. And what did China do? It reached out to America. They normalized relations with Washington after 2 decades of rivalry. They did the same with Imperial Russia when Japan attacked. They played the foreigners against each other. That's what China does. But this time, it may not succeed. And one big reason is the war in Ukraine. China continues to prop up the Russian economy. Their oil purchases from Russia are up 55%. Overall trade is up 36%. Clearly, China has no plans of abandoning Russia. Having said that, why is Europe surprised about any of it? Everyone knows what China stands for, who China stands for, who are China's friends. So why did this position surprise Europe? Because this time the trouble is in their backyard. Time for another flashback. This time to June 2021. The G7 and NATO had concluded their annual meeting. The US pushed for more efforts to contain China, but one leader stood in opposition. French President Emmanuel Macron. Listen in to what he said last year.
Deuxième grande question stratégique, ce sera.
For my part, China is not part of the Atlantic geography, or else my map has a problem. I don't consider it to be the heart of the matter.
Not part of the Atlantic, so not my problem. That was Macron's position. But now things are different. Russia's war is on Europe's borders. It is affecting European countries. If the war spills over, who can Europe count on? NATO or China? It's a no-brainer. You see, Europe may dream of strategic autonomy, but this war has pulled them back into reality. They still need American weapons, they still need American nuclear missiles, and that could push Europe away from Beijing. As long as Taiwan or the South China Sea was the battleground, Europe was fine with all of it. They had no problem sitting on the fence. But a war in their backyard changes the equation completely, and that's one reason. Another reason is the public opinion. Because let's face it, people may use Chinese products all over the world, but they seldom have anything good to say about China. Whether it's on Taiwan or the Uyghur genocide or the South China Sea, opinion polls indicate very little support for China, and leaders realize this. Even the so-called peaceniks like Macron and Olaf Scholz. So they have to make a choice now. Do they work for peace and principles, or do they put trade first? Well, they tried putting trade first with Russia, and look where it got them. So with China, Europe is being a little more careful. A number of moves have already been made, like trade retaliation measures, Uyghur genocide sanctions, better trade relations with Taiwan. All of these decisions have already been approved by the EU, but don't expect big statements or declarations. Because for that, all EU members need to be on the same page. And even now, that seems unlikely, because China still has friends left in Europe, like Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. His one vote alone, can derail any EU measure. What is more likely then is individual action. In Italy, for example, the Prime Minister is using his veto powers. He cancelled 3 Chinese corporate takeovers in 2021. In Germany, Olaf Scholz is doing something similar. He skipped China during his first Asia tour, and now he's asking German industry leaders to diversify their supply chains to move away from China. I know all of this sounds good. It sounds like Europe is finally taking a stand. But multiple challenges still remain, like the looming global recession. Can Europe abandon its largest trading partner in the middle of an economic crisis? Can Eastern Europe forego investments from China? This decision, you see, is not just about politics, it's about Europe's finances, their resolve, and their character. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.